The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the quiet gas station parking lot. The air was thick with the scent of gasoline and hot asphalt, and the occasional distant rumble of a motorcycle engine echoed down the road. It was the kind of evening where nothing much seemed to happen until everything changed in an instant. A group of bikers had pulled in, their engines growling like restless animals. They were the kind of guys who thrived on attention, leather jackets covered in patches, boots scuffing against the pavement as they swaggered toward the store. They were loud, laughing in that way that made people glance but quickly look away. Among them was one man in particular, bigger, meaner, the kind who carried himself like he owned every space he walked into. And then there was the old man. He was standing by the pump, filling up an old, beat-up truck that had seen better days. His hands were steady, movements unhurried, like he had all the time in the world. There was nothing remarkable about him at first glance, just a worn-out cap pulled low over his silver hair, a faded flannel shirt, and boots that had walked through decades of dust and dirt. He should have been just another face in the background. But he wasn't. The biker didn't like the way the old man ignored him. Maybe it was the quiet confidence, the way he didn't shrink under the presence of the roaring bikes and loud voices. Whatever it was, something about him set the biker on edge. "Hey, old-timer," the biker called out, a smirk playing on his lips as he strolled closer. "You lost or something?" The old man didn't react. He simply finished pumping his gas, replacing the nozzle with the same careful precision he had done 1,000 times before. It was as if he hadn't heard the biker at all. The group chuckled, sensing a moment to stir up some trouble. The leader stepped in closer, tilting his head. "I'm talking to you," he said, voice dripping with false friendliness, the kind that carried an edge of danger underneath. Finally, the old man looked up. His eyes, calm, unreadable, met the biker's without a hint of fear. And that was the moment everything shifted. Because in those eyes, there was something the biker wasn't expecting. Not weakness. Not submission. But something else entirely. A warning. The biker didn't know it yet, but he had just made the worst mistake of his night. The biker's smirk twitched slightly, like he wasn't sure if he should be amused or irritated. The way the old man looked at him, it wasn't defiance, not exactly. It was something colder. Something that didn't match the frail frame or the slow, deliberate movements. It was the kind of look that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, even if you didn't understand why. "Got a problem, old man?" The biker asked, his voice still holding that forced playfulness, but with a sharper edge now. The rest of the group shifted, their laughter dying down as they watched, waiting to see where this was going. The old man didn't flinch. He simply picked up the gas cap and twisted it back into place, tapping it twice as if he were making sure it was secure. Then, without a word, he turned toward the driver's side door of his truck. That should have been the end of it. A moment of awkward tension, maybe a few laughs from the bikers as they called him names when he drove off. But for some reason, the biker wasn't ready to let it go. He stepped forward, planting his boot right against the rusted truck door before the old man could open it. "Not so fast," he said, the smirk back in full force now, glancing at his crew as if to make sure they were all still watching. "I think we're owed a little respect, don't you?" The old man paused. Slowly, he turned his head to look at the biker's boot, then at the man himself. His expression didn't change, but something in the air did. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but the way he stood, the way he shifted his weight, the way he looked at the biker, it was enough to send a flicker of something cold down the younger man's spine. It lasted less than a second. The biker shook it off, masking the feeling with a scoff. "You hear me, old man?" he pressed, leaning in just a little closer. Still, the old man didn't speak. But this time, he did move. His hand came up, slow and steady, and for a brief moment, the biker tensed, as if expecting something sudden. But all the old man did was reach toward the biker's boot, then, with the gentlest push of his fingers, nudged it just enough to slide it off the truck door. The biker blinked. It was such a small action. Barely more than a tap. But the message was clear. Move. For a split second, the biker hesitated. Then, as if realizing what had just happened in front of his friends, his face darkened. "You got some nerve," he muttered, stepping in closer again. His fists curled at his sides, his shoulders squaring up. The kind of posture that said he was ready to prove something. The old man didn't back away. Didn't shift. Didn't do anything except let his gaze drift up to meet the bikers once again. And this time, there was something in his eyes that the biker finally recognized. Experience. Not the kind that comes from bar fights or street brawls. Not the kind that comes from posturing and throwing punches when you've got an audience. No, this was something else. Something older. Something that spoke of violence in a way that was quieter and far more dangerous. The biker felt it now. That creeping sensation at the edge of his nerves. That instinct buried deep in the back of his mind, the one that whispered, "This is not the fight you want." But pride was a stubborn thing. And his friends were watching. He forced a chuckle, shaking his head. "Man, you really think you're something, don't you?" He rolled his shoulders, trying to push away the strange unease that had settled in his chest. "How about you say something for once, huh?" Still, the old man said nothing. Instead, he reached for the truck door again. Calm. Unbothered. And for some reason, that made the biker snap. His hand shot out, grabbing the old man's wrist, not hard, not yet, but just enough to stop him. Just enough to make sure he knew who was in control. Or at least, that's what he thought. Because the moment his fingers closed around the old man's wrist, everything changed. It happened so fast, the biker didn't even understand it at first. 1 second, he was gripping the old man's arm. The next, his own hand was twisting, his body shifting, his balance suddenly gone. And then, pain. A sharp, precise pressure along his wrist, his elbow, his shoulder, before his whole body was wrenched forward, spinning off balance. He stumbled, his knee hitting the pavement hard enough to send a jolt of pain up his leg. His grip was gone. His breath caught in his throat. And by the time he looked up, the old man was already standing over him. Not angry. Not smug. Just watching. The biker froze. The rest of the group had fallen completely silent, their eyes wide, their mouths slightly open. They weren't laughing anymore. The old man held his gaze for a moment longer. Then, without a word, he turned away, stepping into his truck like nothing had happened. The engine roared to life. The truck rumbled forward, rolling past the stunned group without hesitation. And just like that, he was gone. But the biker didn't move. He just sat there, his mind racing, his heart pounding against his ribs. Because in that brief, effortless moment he had felt it. That old man, whoever he was. He was something else. The biker slowly pushed himself up from the pavement, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. His friends were still silent, their eyes darting between him and the direction the old man's truck had disappeared. The humiliation burned hotter than the pain in his knee. He had been put on the ground effortlessly by a man who looked like he belonged in a rocking chair on a porch, not throwing people around like they weighed nothing. One of the other bikers let out a low whistle. Dude, what the hell was that? The biker's hands curled into fists. His pride wouldn't let him just walk away from this. Not with his crew watching. Not with the feeling of that old man's grip still fresh in his mind. That old bastard thinks he's funny? He muttered, spitting onto the pavement. His voice was tight, his breath coming a little too fast. Nah. That doesn't sit right with me. Another biker, a wiry guy with a scar along his jaw, shifted uncomfortably. Man, maybe we just let it go. Guy's probably ex-military or something. Did you see how fast he moved? But that only made it worse. The idea that the old man had experience, that this wasn't just a lucky moment, that made the biker's blood boil. He wasn't some nobody. He had been in fights, had knocked guys down before. But this wasn't just a fight. This was a message. And the old man had sent it loud and clear. The biker yanked his helmet off his handlebars, shoving it on. "We'll see how funny he is when he's not catching me off guard." Someone else hesitated before speaking. "You sure about that?" The biker didn't answer. He just swung his leg over his bike, revved the engine, and peeled out of the gas station, his tires kicking up dust and gravel as he sped down the road. The others exchanged glances before following. The chase was on. The highway stretched ahead, the old man's truck barely visible in the distance. The biker twisted the throttle, feeling the familiar rush of speed as he closed the gap. The roar of engines behind him told him the others were following, but his focus was locked on the truck ahead. It was steady, unwavering, cruising along like nothing had happened. Like the driver didn't have a care in the world. That only made it worse. The biker swerved into the next lane, pulling up beside the truck. He glanced through the window. The old man was still calm. One hand on the wheel, the other resting casually on the gearshift. His eyes flicked toward the biker for the briefest second before returning to the road. Like he wasn't concerned. Like he wasn't even bothered. The biker's grip on the handlebars tightened. He revved the engine, letting the deep growl fill the air. A warning. A challenge. The truck didn't speed up. Didn't slow down. It just kept going. The biker gritted his teeth, heart pounding in his chest. His friends were catching up now, forming a loose pack around the truck, their engines snarling as they spread out on either side. The old man couldn't ignore them now. But still, the truck didn't waver. The biker leaned in closer, knocking on the window with his knuckles. Nothing. His jaw clenched. Enough was enough. He pulled ahead slightly, then swerved just enough to drift into the truck's lane. Not enough to hit it, but enough to force the old man to react. The truck finally did move. But not the way he expected. Instead of slamming the brakes or jerking away, the truck held steady for a split second longer than it should have before nudging just slightly in his direction. It was small. Barely anything. But at this speed, on this road, it was enough. The biker felt it instantly, the invisible shift of control. The old man wasn't reacting to him. He was controlling the road. For the first time, the biker felt a flicker of something he didn't like. Doubt. Before he could decide what to do, the truck sped up. Not wildly. Not recklessly. Just enough to break through the cluster of bikers surrounding it, cutting through their formation with the kind of precision that didn't come from some ordinary old man behind the wheel. It was a move. A trained move. And the biker realized, too late, that he was the one being played with. His hands tightened on the handlebars as his bike wobbled slightly from the air pressure shift. He regained control, growling in frustration. This wasn't over. He twisted the throttle harder, pushing forward, but then, without warning, the truck signaled. It was such a normal thing, so casual, that it made the biker hesitate. Why would the old man signal? They were in the middle of nowhere. There was nothing ahead. No turns. No exits. Just long, open road. And yet the biker's stomach dropped. Because he wasn't looking at the road ahead. He had been so focused on the truck that he hadn't checked what was behind them. The distant glare of headlights. Low. Unmoving. It wasn't another biker. It wasn't a car. It was a vehicle that didn't need to rush. That didn't need to weave through traffic. That didn't need to announce itself with roaring engines. And it was gaining on them. The biker's mouth went dry. His heart pounded harder now, not with anger, but with something colder. The old man had known. From the very beginning, he had known. And now the real game was about to start. The biker's breath came fast and shallow as he darted a glance in his side mirror. The headlights in the distance were still there, steady, unhurried. Too steady. Whoever was driving wasn't in a rush, but they weren't backing off either. That was the part that sent a chill through him. This wasn't just some random vehicle on the highway. It was following them. And the old man had known. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. The whole time, he had been one step ahead. Every move the biker made, the old man had already accounted for. He hadn't just been reacting, he had been leading them exactly where he wanted. The biker turned back toward the truck, gripping his handlebars so tightly his knuckles went white. The old man hadn't sped up again. He was still driving at the same controlled pace, his brake lights glowing faintly in the darkening evening. It wasn't a chase. It was a setup. The thought sent a surge of panic through the biker, but his pride shoved it down before it could take root. No. That wasn't possible. There was no way this old man was playing him. No way he had some kind of plan. He was just a stubborn, lucky old guy who had gotten in one good move back at the gas station. That's all. Right? The biker turned his head slightly, scanning his crew. They were still riding close, but there was a different energy now. They felt it too, the shift, the unspoken warning in the air. A couple of them looked uneasy, their earlier excitement fading. Scar Joe rode up beside him, keeping his voice low as they sped down the open road. Dude. Who is this guy? The biker didn't answer. He didn't have one. But what he did know was that his frustration had turned into something sharper. This wasn't about proving himself anymore. It wasn't even about pride. It was about control. And he refused to believe some old man had taken it from him. Grinding his teeth, he made his decision. No more playing games. With a quick jerk of the handlebars, he veered into the truck's lane again, this time, cutting closer than before. His tires skimmed dangerously near the edge of the pavement, but he didn't care. He wanted the old man to react. But the truck didn't flinch. Didn't swerve. Didn't slow. Didn't acknowledge him at all. That was the final straw. The biker reached into his jacket pocket, fingers closing around a heavy handful of metal. A wrench. Just a small one. Just enough to get a point across. He wasn't going to hurt the guy, just shake him up a little. Let him know that messing with the wrong people had consequences. With a quick flick of his wrist, he let the wrench fly. It spun through the air, cutting the short distance between them in an instant. And then, in a move so smooth and effortless it was almost unreal, the old man caught it. The biker's stomach dropped. One hand still on the wheel, the old man had snatched the wrench out of midair as if it had been nothing. Not even a struggle. Just pure, practiced reflex. And that's when the biker knew. This wasn't just some lucky old guy. This was someone who had done this before. Someone who had been in real fights, not bar brawls, not roadside scuffles, but something else. Something bigger. And the way he held that wrench, fingers curled around it with the kind of ease that spoke of muscle memory, told the biker one thing. He had just made a terrible mistake. The old man rolled his wrist, turning the wrench between his fingers like he was testing its weight. Then, in one simple, controlled movement, he tossed it. Not back at the biker. That would have been easy. That would have been expected. Instead, he threw it down. Straight into the highway. And in an instant everything exploded into chaos. The wrench hit the pavement at high speed, bouncing unpredictably between the tires of the trailing bikers. The first guy barely swerved in time, his bike wobbling violently. The second wasn't so lucky, his front wheel clipped the edge of the metal, sending his bike skidding sideways in a spray of sparks. Yelling. Screeching tires. The smell of burnt rubber filled the air. The biker barely had time to react before he felt the shockwave of motion behind him. His crew was scattering, their formation breaking as they struggled to avoid a full-blown wipeout. And through it all, the old man's truck kept going. Steady. Unstoppable. Like he had never been worried at all. The biker's heart pounded in his chest. His mind raced, torn between the chaos behind him and the quiet, terrifying control in front of him. And then, the headlights from behind drew closer. No longer distant. No longer slow. Whoever was following them, whoever the old man had known was coming, was finally here. And they weren't stopping. The biker's pulse pounded in his ears as the headlights from behind grew larger, their glow cutting through the dust and chaos. His crew was barely recovering, some still swerving to regain control after the old man's wrench trick. But there was no time to regroup. No time to think. Because now, something else was coming. His instincts screamed at him to floor it, to get as far away from whatever was behind them as possible. But the old man's truck still loomed in front, steady and unmoved, like a wall he couldn't break through. The biker gritted his teeth. Enough. With one last desperate move, he yanked his handlebars and surged forward, pulling alongside the truck once more. He didn't care about the old man's tricks anymore. He just wanted to see his face, to look him in the eye and demand answers. But when he turned his head, the old man was already looking at him. And he was smiling. Not a grin. Not smug. Just calm. Knowing. Like he had seen this all before. The biker's chest tightened. This was wrong. All of this was wrong. Then the old man did something simple. He lifted 2 fingers off the wheel just slightly. A gesture. A signal. And suddenly, the world shifted. The lights behind them flashed once, and then red and blue. The biker's stomach dropped. A patrol car. No 2 patrol cars. Hidden in the distance. Waiting. Watching. And now, moving in. The biker barely had time to process before the sirens blared, cutting through the night like a blade. His crew jolted, heads snapping toward the sudden flashing lights. Someone cursed. Someone else hit the brakes too hard and nearly lost control again. The biker's heart slammed against his ribs. It had been a trap the whole time. Not just the truck. The whole thing. The old man hadn't just lured them into some game, he had been leading them straight into a sting. The biker turned to the truck one last time, his breath coming fast, his mind racing for an escape. But the old man was still calm. Still watching. Then, just as the patrol cars closed and the truck signaled again. And just like that, it pulled off the highway. Smooth. Effortless. Untouchable. The biker watched in stunned silence as the truck disappeared down an exit ramp, the old man never even glancing back. Like he had never been there at all. Like he had just been a ghost on the road. Then the sirens surged behind him, and reality came crashing down. The biker snapped back to the present. The cops were closing in fast. There was no way out, no time to run. His crew was scattering, trying to break away, but there was no breaking away from this. The old man had played them perfectly. And now, all they could do was face the consequences. As the flashing lights swallowed the night, the biker finally understood. He had never been the one in control. Not for a second. The biker sat frozen for a split second, his mind struggling to catch up with what had just happened. The old man was gone, slipping away like a shadow in the night, while the flashing lights behind him grew brighter, their piercing sirens closing in fast. His chest heaved as adrenaline flooded his system, but he knew this was it. There was no more running. No more chasing. His crew had already started to break apart, some peeling off in a last-ditch effort to escape, others slowing down as if realizing there was no point. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, but it felt like a dead end. A voice crackled through a loudspeaker. Pull over. Now. The biker swallowed hard. His hands tightened on the handlebars. His whole life, he had played by his own rules, taking what he wanted, proving himself in every fight, every challenge. But tonight, for the first time, he wasn't in control. He made his choice. Easing off the throttle, he let the bike slow, then pulled onto the shoulder, gravel crunching beneath his tires. His heart pounded as he lifted his hands in plain sight, hearing the other bikes roll to a stop beside him. Some of the crew were still running, engines roaring in the distance, but he didn't move. He knew better. The patrol cars screeched to a stop behind them. Doors slammed. Boots pounded against the pavement. Hands where we can see them. The biker exhaled slowly, lifting his hands higher. The cops moved fast, surrounding them, voices sharp, movements practiced. He barely heard the orders as they were told to dismount, to step away, to put their hands behind their heads. His body went through the motions automatically. As the cold metal of the cuffs clicked around his wrists, reality sank in. It was over. The crew was lined up beside him, some cursing under their breath, others just staring at the ground. Scar Jaw gave him a look, half frustration, half something else. Like he was still trying to figure out how the hell they had ended up here. The biker wished he had an answer. An officer moved in front of him, watching him carefully. "You want to tell me what you were doing out here tonight?" The biker just shook his head. What could he even say? That an old man had played him like a chess piece? That he had thought he was the predator, only to find out he was the prey? The cop studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "You're lucky," he muttered. "Could have been a lot worse." The biker let out a short, humorless laugh. He didn't feel lucky. Not even a little. The officers moved through the crew, checking records, asking questions, sorting through the mess they had walked into. Some of the younger guys looked rattled, their tough exteriors starting to crack now that the weight of the situation was sinking in. A few of them, probably the ones with outstanding warrants, were loaded into the back of the patrol cars. The biker just stood there, feeling the weight of the cuffs, the heaviness in his chest. Then, just as the cops were wrapping things up, something caught his eye. A figure. Far down the road, barely visible in the dim glow of a streetlight, a man stood leaning against a familiar-looking truck. Arms crossed. Watching. The old man. The biker's breath caught in his throat. He was just standing there. Not running. Not hiding. Just watching. For a brief second, their eyes met across the distance. The biker didn't know what he expected to see. Amusement? Satisfaction? Some kind of final message? But the old man's expression was unreadable. Then, just as silently as he had appeared, he pushed off the truck, climbed inside, and drove away. No hesitation. No looking back. And just like that, he was gone. The biker stood there long after the truck had vanished, his mind replaying every second of the night, every mistake, every moment he had thought he was the one in control. He had never even come close.
Hi there, welcome to Jenny. The simple mode is perfect for creating single-speaker short voiceovers. Simply pick your preferred speaker, type or copy and paste your script. Then click the Generate button to generate your voiceover in seconds. You will see the voiceover output on the right for you to freely share or download. For more advanced capabilities, video editing, or longer multi-speaker voiceover production, please check out the advanced mode instead. Your creative journey now awaits. Get started now.